Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. It's 9 o'clock there, yeah?
It's 9 o'clock, yeah.
It's 3 o'clock here.
That's not too, that's quite a good,
Okay.
two quite good times, I think.
Oh, yeah. You have a solid background. I think it's really nice. It fits on you.
Yeah, it's better than the wall.
It's better than the wall. Okay. Yeah, it's already 3 o'clock. So do you mind if I speak in Bahasa first, Dylan? And I will.
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Pembawa acaranya siapa?
Ulwan.
Ulwan, okay. Please, boleh dimulai kayaknya ya.
Silakan Ulwan.
Baik Bu.
Wait a minute, Dylan. Ulwan. Dylan, we are about to start. So this is the one of our student who will become the Master of Ceremony MC today. Can we start, Dylan?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, please. Thank you. Please, Ulwan.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, all of participants in this Zoom meeting for today. I will be the Master of Ceremony in our event today. The Honorable Dean of the Faculty of Teaching and Education, Tanjung Pura University, Professor Dr. H. Martono, MPD. And then the Honorable Head of Chemistry Education Study Program, Tanjung Pura University, Mr. Rahmat Rasmawan, MPD. The Honorable Speaker in this guest lecture, Mr. Dr. Dylan William M.Chem PhD, MRSC NTF. The Honorable Allah Lecturer of Chemistry Education, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen in this conference. Before we start to the agenda for today, first of all, we would like to thank and express our gratitude to our study program, Chemistry Educations, for existing our event today. It's called the guest lecture by Chemistry Education Study Program, Faculty of Teaching and Education, Tanjung Pura University. Okay, before we go straight to our agenda for today, let me introduce myself. My name is Rahmat Ulwan, acting as the Master of Ceremony in this event today. And ladies and gentlemen, this event was the first event is proudly present by the Chemistry Educations in this year and Faculty of Teaching and Education, Tanjung Pura University. And for your information, this event features a theme in every session, just like in our first sessions for today, is just about context and problem learning that represent not only for once, but there will be many sessions which of course can be attended by ladies and gentlemen in this conference or this event for today. And to begin with, allow me to read the agenda for our opening ceremony today. The first one, listening to the Indonesian national anthem. And the second one is the opening remark by Dean Faculty of Teaching and Education, Mr. Professor Dr. H. Martono, MPD. And then the third one is recitations of prayer. And then will be followed by photo sessions at the last program. The Honorable distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to honor our country, let us all listening to the Indonesian national anthem, Indonesia Raya. Okay, thank you for the committee that have presenting out to the Indonesian national anthem. And then we are going to the next agenda for today. It's the opening remark by Dean faculty. Because the dean is not currently in this room, so we are going to the next agenda for our discussions or our agenda for opening ceremony today. The next agenda is recitations of prayers that will be being by Pinkan Ramadan. For the Pinkan Ramadan, the time is yours.
Baiklah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sebelum memulai kegiatan kita pada hari ini, yang mana alangkah lebih baiknya supaya diberikan kemudahan dan kelancaran agar apa yang kita laksanakan pada hari ini menjadi amal ibadah untuk kita semua. Oleh karena itu, izinkanlah saya untuk memimpin doa. Bagi yang beragama Islam, izinkan saya untuk memimpin doa. Dan yang beragama non-Islam, silakan untuk menyesuaikan menurut agama dan kepercayaan masing-masing. A'udzubillahiminasyaitonirrajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hamdan syakirin, hamdan na'imin, hamdan yu'afi ni'mahu wa yukafi mazidah. Ya Rabbana lakal hamdu kama yanbaghi li jalali wajhikal karimi wa azimi wa sultani. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali sayyidina Muhammad. Allahumma inna nas'aluka salamatan fid din wa afiatan fil jasad wa ziyatan fil ilmi wa barakatan fi rizki wa taubatan qablal maut wa rahmatan 'indal maut wa maghfiratan ba'dal maut. Allahumma hawin 'alaina fi syakaratil maut wan najata minan nari wal aqwa indal hisab. Rabbana la tuzigh qulubana ba'da iz hadaitana wa hab lana min ladunka rahmah innaka antal wahhab. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina azabannar. Ya Allah, ya Tuhan kami, pada hari ini ya Allah, izinkanlah kami yang hadir pada sore hari ini menundukkan kepala untuk mengagungkan nama-Mu. Atas izin dan ridha-Mu pada sore hari ini ya Allah, kami dapat melangsungkan kegiatan guest lecture program studi pendidikan kimia sesi 1 dengan tema Context and Problem Learning bersama Dr. Dylan Williams. Ya Allah, ya Alim, Engkau yang maha kaya atas segala ilmu pengetahuan. Tunjukkanlah kepada kami yang benar itu adalah benar, yang salah itu adalah salah. Berikanlah kepada kami kekuatan untuk melaksanakannya ya Allah. Dan tunjukkanlah kepada kami yang salah itu adalah salah, serta berikanlah kekuatan keimanan sehingga kamu dapat menjauhinya. Eratkanlah rasa persaudaraan dan persatuan kami ya Allah. Ya Allah yang maha pengampun, Engkau yang maha pengampun atas segala dosa. Ampunilah dosa-dosa kami ya Allah, dosa-dosa para guru-guru kami, dosa orang tua kami, dan dosa para pemimpin kami. Tempatkanlah mereka dalam lindungan dan rahmat-Mu. Ya Allah, ya Mujib, Engkau yang maha mengabulkan doa, perkenankanlah doa kami. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina azabannar. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun alal mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Doa banyak. Recording in progress.
Okay, thank you for the Pinkan Ramadan for bringing the recitations of prayer in our conference today. And then, ladies and gentlemen, the honorable, for the documentations, we are going to have a photo sessions, right? Because we have a lot of screen page in our conference today. There are more than, if I see here, there are more than 7 and 8. So the participant in this conference, so it will be taken by one in every screen, and our commit will be take a picture in every screen, and I will count to 1, 2, 3, and the commit to take a picture. Okay, we were to we are going to start from the first page. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, the second one. 1, 2, 3. And the next. 1, 2, 3. And next. 1, 2, 3. Okay, next. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think that's all. So for the next, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the opening ceremony. I am thankful to all guests and participants of this ceremony. I do hope you enjoy this conference, and I also apologize if there are words or actions that pleasing less, and I'm sorry if my speech not sorry for Mr. Jilan. I'm not native in English, so I'm just trying to learn how to speak in English well. And then this event will then be led by our moderator is Mrs. Erlina MPD PhD. And I think that's all I can say. Thanks for nice attentions. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. And for the Mrs. Erlina MPD PhD, time is yours.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Dylan, it's kind of a ceremony that we have before we begin the guest lecture. Actually, this is the first time our department invited the native speaker, the native. We want to, actually we got the grant this year. It's quite a big amount. So this is one of the series of the event that we want to, to our students to have more experience about to know more about and invited for more information, more details about from the expert. So that's why we are inviting you. So before we begin, please let me greetings all of the participants and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, thank you for attending to this event. Actually, it's almost 124. It's not only for students, it's also our lecturer from our department who will join, who will attending this session. Okay. Let me introduce myself. My name is Erlina, and I'm the moderator for the presentation of the guest lecture today. So, like I said before, our department is having got a PKKM grant from the higher education dicty from our government. So this is one of the event that we want to add as to invite the expert for students and for the lecture. So our presenter today, so the guest lecturer is Dr. Dylan Williams. He is an associate professor from the School of Chemistry of the University of Birmingham. He has many awards for the last 10 years, I see in the CV. I think 3 of them is the most distinguished. Yeah, in 2017, he got the Higher Education Academy National Teaching Fellowship and Higher Education Academy Collaborative Award for Teaching Excellence. While in 2018, he got the Royal Society of Chemistry Higher Education Teaching Award as a winner. So he has many publications in the reputable journal, of course, about context and problem-based learning. So I think by inviting him is is the right decision because he's one of the experts. Dylan will talk about the context and problem-based learning. So as we all know that context-based learning or CBL is an approach that any learning that places content within a meaningful context, while problem-based learning can be viewed as a subset of CBL. So in PBL, the context is framed as an open-ended problem scenario. And of course, now Dylan will discuss more about what context and problem-based learning, and probably he will focus on what he already done about this in University of Leicester. He works previously in University of Leicester before Birmingham. So please welcome Dr. Dylan Williams. Are you going to share your screen by yourself?
Yes, yeah, if I can, please. Yeah.
Okay, you already co-host, so I think you can share your screen.
Brilliant. Right.
Yeah, okay.
Hopefully you can see that. Is that on the screen now?
Oh yeah, we can see that. It's really clear.
Fantastic.
Okay. So
thank you very much.
I'll hand it to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to start by thanking the organisers for inviting me, but I also wanted to thank everyone for coming along and attending today. It's a phenomenal audience. I can see well over 100 people attending, so thank you very much for coming along to participate today. So I'm Dylan, and I've worked in higher education in the UK since 2007. Between 2007 and 21, I worked at the University of Leicester. So a lot of what I talk about actually happened at the University of Leicester. But since January of this year, I moved to the University of Birmingham. So I might talk a little bit about some of the things I'm starting to do at Birmingham. So just so that you get a feel for where these places are, because there are various parts of the UK that I might refer to in the talk. So this is the map of the UK. So I'm actually from Wales, which is quite a distinct part of the country. We have our own language and we have our own culture. It's quite different to England. And that's the name of my village that you can see on that sign there. It's one of the longest place names in the United Kingdom. I think it's the second longest, actually. And we pronounce that as Ros Llanachigog, which no one from England can say that. No one can pronounce our language from England, so it's we have a lot of fun with that.
It's hard to say.
It is, yeah. And it means it means the church on the heathery moor, if you translate it into English. So it's a kind of mountain with lots of heather on it, and it was it was once a very religious place. It had lots of churches and chapels, and so it was once known as the home of the religious revival in Wales once upon a time.
So this is the Welsh language, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So that's where I'm from. That's where I was raised and grew up. I moved, when I started university, I moved about 40 miles away across the border into England to Liverpool. And Liverpool's probably best known for the Beatles and best known for football as well, for the football club. It's also a beautiful city. It's a really, really nice city. And I worked there for 8 years. So I did an undergraduate degree in chemistry, an M.Chem there. And then I did a PhD in nanotechnology at Liverpool, also in the School of Chemistry. Once I left Liverpool in 2007, after doing my 2 degrees there, I moved to the University of Leicester. So Leicester's probably best known for Richard III. So you can see a statue of Richard III there outside the cathedral. Leicester's a very historic city. It's much smaller than Liverpool, but it's a nice market town in the Midlands, and it has a lot of history. And I was there for 14 years, or just over 14 years, and then I moved to Birmingham, which is about 30 miles away from Leicester. Birmingham's a much bigger city than Leicester. Birmingham is the second biggest city in the UK, and it recently hosted the Commonwealth Games, which is the big major sporting event. And you can see there's a picture of a bowl there. That was one of the mascots of the Commonwealth Games, and they actually used that in the opening ceremony of the games. And then the other picture shows the tram, which we've had lots of trouble with the tram. It broke lots of times over the summer, but they managed to fix it just in time for the Commonwealth Games. It just about worked.
Okay.
So
Right.
this is my background. This is what I've done over my career. I think you've probably heard most of this already, so I don't need to spend too long on it. Key thing is I was at Liverpool between 1999 and 2007, did 2 degrees. When I left Liverpool, I moved from being a discipline-focused researcher to being a pedagogical researcher or an educator. And from 2007 onwards, my career has been entirely focused on chemistry education, chemistry pedagogy. So everything I've done since 2007 has been based in that area. I was at Leicester, like I said, until 2021. And as we talked about earlier, I won a few awards while I was at Leicester, which you can see on the screen there. So I'm at Birmingham now, and Birmingham's chemistry school is quite well known in the UK, largely because it has 2 Nobel laureates. So Sir Norman Haworth, who did some groundbreaking work on vitamin C, did his research at the University of Birmingham and won his Nobel Prize for the work he did at Birmingham. And more recently, Sir Fraser Stoddart, who was a former head of department, he won the Nobel Prize for molecular machines, and that was in the last 10 years, so that was a much more recent one. There are also some famous Birmingham graduates who went on to win Nobel Prizes for work they did elsewhere, including Boris Wilkins, who's involved in some of the groundbreaking work on the DNA structure. So Birmingham is a really nice place to work, and they're not forcing me to say that. It really is a nice place to work. So one of the reasons for that is that we have fantastic new facilities. So the laboratory teaching that we do, which I will talk about in another session, another time, our laboratory teaching is based in a new building that opened in 2019 called the Collaborative Teaching Laboratory. And we have all of our year 1 to year 3 labs in there. The university spent over £2.5 million on setting that building up, and it is equipped with all the latest state-of-the-art equipment that our students need to do their lab program. In addition to that, we have a new School of Chemistry building, which will open next year. It's called the Molecular Sciences Building. This will become the new hub for the School of Chemistry. It's where our offices will move to. We will do some of our teaching there, and a lot of our student support services will be relocated to the new building. So it's a really exciting time for me to join the School of Chemistry at Birmingham. Just to give you a bit of context in terms of how we deliver our programs, we do 2 different types of degrees. So we do single honours degrees where the students focus largely on just the chemistry. And you can see there are different varieties of that single honours degree. So you can just do chemistry, or you can do chemistry with industrial experience, which allows a student to go out and spend a year working in industry, or you can do chemistry with study abroad, or they can study a modern language alongside their degree, or they can do then our new medicinal chemistry degree program as well. We also have what the university calls a major minor honours program. So this is where the students split their credits between 2 disciplines. And the one that we offer is chemistry with business management. So they will do some of their modules taught by us in the School of Chemistry, and they will do some modules taught by the Birmingham Business School as well. And the general structure of our degree program, depending on whether the students choose to do a BSc degree or an M.Chem degree. So a BSc degree is a 3-year chemistry degree. It's quite the standard chemistry degree in the UK, I suppose. The M.Chem degree is an integrated master's. So it basically comprises the BSc plus an extra year at the end of it. And the students graduate with a master's degree. It means they don't have to graduate first with a BSc and then come back to do the master's. It's quite common in the UK these days to have these integrated masters. So students typically do 60 credits worth of core chemistry in each of the first 3 years. And then you see there's some optionality or some skills-based training in each of those degrees to top them up to their 120 credits that they need. Year 4, there's a large degree of optionality in year 4. Students basically choose which path they want to take. So they choose which topics within chemistry they want to study, and they study 60 credits of that, and they do a 60 credit research project alongside that to make it 120 credits. So that's all I'm really going to say about Birmingham and about myself, I suppose. I'm going to start talking about why I got involved in context and problem-based learning. I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is and how it works. And then I'm going to talk about some examples of context and problem-based learning activities that I've developed here in the UK and things that I've shared via publications that I've released. So one of the big motivations for us doing context and problem-based learning in the UK is the fact that we were still teaching chemistry degrees in a very traditional way up until quite recently. So chemistry degrees, let's say 20 years ago, at the start of the 21st century, still had a very traditional structure. So students spent most of their time in lectures or in the teaching laboratory, spent most of their time in one of those two environments. There might have been a small amount of small group teaching. So there might have been a small, low number of hours of tutorials, for example. Yeah. And at the end of the degree, students would typically do a final year research project where they would work in the research lab for a year or so. This model hadn't really changed in a very long time. So this is the same kind of chemistry program structure that you would have seen 50 years ago. And it probably would have been recognizable to people studying chemistry even 100 years earlier. So it hadn't changed very much. The problem was the types of people going to university was changing very rapidly. So historically in the UK, university was something that was only really accessible for people who are quite lucky, people who are from very affluent backgrounds, for example, who had very wealthy families, or people who won scholarships, which were even far between, unfortunately. In the late 20th century, the funding model for studying at university changed, and it became much more accessible to the broader public, which meant anyone could go to university, essentially. And numbers of people studying at university increased very suddenly. And the numbers of people who were coming from normal state schools, so government-run schools, into universities, that increased very, very suddenly. So as a consequence, the university sector needed to change to reflect the changing types of students they were recruiting. And before university, pre-university, the UK has a pretty good comprehensive school system. So all students at school level, so up to the age of 16, study chemistry in some way, shape or form. So they will either have dedicated chemistry classes or they will study chemistry as a topic in science classes. At the age of 16, the student has a choice to make at that point. They can either leave the school system and get a job, or they can stay in school for another 2 years, and we call that college. Between 16 and 18, we call that college, or sixth form college sometimes. And at that stage, the students study for another qualification, which is a kind of pre-university qualification. Those qualifications, the majority of students in the UK study what we call A levels, which stands for advanced level. However, there are some other qualifications that some students study between ages 16 to 18. When they successfully complete those courses, if they choose to study chemistry A level and they get a good grade in it, they get a grade A or a grade B maybe, they then have the opportunity to study chemistry at university level. But all universities will have a set of entry requirements before they allow students to come and study chemistry. They will require students to have completed that 16 to 18 qualification, that A level or equivalent, and they will expect them to get a good grade in it. Each university has its own entry requirements. So here at Birmingham, we expect all of our students to have grade A or grade B in chemistry. At other universities, they might have slightly lower entry requirements. They might accept grade C at some universities, maybe even lower at some other universities. So there is some variation. There is no national standard. The entry standard is set by each individual universities. But grade B or above is quite common, I would say, and certainly for the better known universities in the UK. So I think one thing we can be relatively confident of is that the students we recruit already have a reasonable understanding of the subject because they have done this pre-university qualification. And the A level is actually quite similar to a US general chemistry course. So the topics that are covered, the style of teaching, the assessment of the UK A-level is actually quite similar to a general chemistry course in a university degree in America. So it gives us a little bit of a head start. It means we don't need to do that kind of general chemistry teaching at university, which is quite good. So all of our students in principle have this entry level knowledge of chemistry. So that means we often teach more complex topics at first year level. So for example, my teaching at Leicester, I used to teach quantum mechanics at first year of the chemistry degree. And that's a topic that in some countries, in the US, for example, you wouldn't typically expect to be in year one of a degree program. That's because our students all come in with this background qualification. So the chemistry departments in England and Wales typically teach between 100 and 200 students a year. At Birmingham, we have about 140 students per year. But we largely only teach chemistry students. So the majority of the time we are teaching students who have chosen to study chemistry, and we're not teaching engineers or biologists or physicists who need to pick up some credit in chemistry. We don't really do that. There are very small isolated occasions where we might do what we call service teaching, which is where we would go out to another department and we would teach their students, but we don't generally mix their students with our students. So we generally teach them in separate modules. So if we were teaching chemistry for biochemistry, we would go to biochemistry, we would teach their students separately to ours, which is, in some ways, that's quite convenient because it means we always know the approximate backgrounds of our own students. It means we always know what kind of background and information, background understanding they have. We know what kind of practical experience they have, that kind of thing. So we have this very traditional way of delivering our chemistry degrees. And what I'm going to talk about today is basically a transformation that's happened in the last 15 to 20 years in the UK. And the first thing I'd like to do before we get into that is thinking about why did we change excuse me, why did we change the way that we teach? And the first motivation, the first reason we changed our approaches to teaching was because we changed the way we recruited students changed. So like I said earlier, funding models changed, and as a consequence, university became much more accessible to anyone in principle. So we needed to change the way we delivered our degree programs to make them accessible to students from a wide range of different educational backgrounds. We need to accommodate people who had been to private schools, to public schools, to alternative education establishments. So that meant we needed to change the support that we gave and some of the ways that we taught. There was some research conducted by the Royal Society of Chemistry and the UK's Higher Education Academy as well that showed that the skills that we were teaching our students over the course of their degree didn't quite match up to the skills that were needed in the places of work that they were going into after they graduated. So there was what we call a gap between the skills that were needed for our professional chemists to have and the skills that we were teaching them in the degree programs. So we had to revise the way we trained our students and the experiences we gave them to develop those skills. There was also a widening awareness of the ineffectiveness of some of those traditional approaches, like that lecture first approach, that very didactic approach. There were some questions about the effectiveness of it. And the landmark study that, you know, if I want to refer one of my non-pedagogy facing colleagues, so if I want to talk to one of my discipline research colleagues about the need to do something different, the need to change the way we teach, I always refer them to the Freeman paper from 2014 that was published in Protocols of the National Academy of Science, because that is a journal they all recognize, and they all hold in very high regard. And this was a very important paper reinforcing the fact that we need to be making more use of active learning methodologies to engage our students and to support their development. So we embarked on a program of curriculum change at the University of Leicester, and we started this around 2007. This was partly funded by some Royal Society of Chemistry funding. We got some money off the RSC to help us achieve this. And the condition of that funding was that we researched the impact of what we were doing, and we disseminated it very widely. So we shared the lessons we learned with other universities. And that's why I have spent a lot of time writing up the work that I've been doing, and a lot of time talking at conferences and talking at different universities about the research that I've done. So there are three aspects that three facets of our strategy that we adopted to update our curriculum, to change our curriculum. First one was the introduction of inquiry-based learning approaches. You just excuse me for a minute, I need to close the door. Sorry about that, someone's doing something very noisy outside. So the first one was the adoption of inquiry-based learning approaches. And this is what I'm going to be talking about today. And this is where students work on team-based challenges and introduce them to the approaches that they need to be familiar with at university and types of approaches they will need to be familiar with in their profession. We also revised the way we delivered lab. So we changed the way we did practical chemistry. We enhanced the pre-laboratory experience, and we used technology to enhance that. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that in one of the later sessions. Specifically, I'll be talking about the use of pre-laboratory simulations and video resources and interactive quizzes. We also did quite a lot of work on the integration of key workplace skills in the chemistry degree program. So we use context and problem-based learning to give students the opportunity to learn the skills that they needed to be successful in the workplace. So that by the time they graduated, by the time they left university, they had a very comprehensive set of skills that were highly sought after by employers. So I told you there was some research done by the Higher Education Academy on the skills required by professional chemists and compared to the skills that we were teaching at university level. And this is a summary of some of the key findings from that study. So this is a table that was compiled by Tina Overton and Steve Hansen just over 10 years ago. And you can see for each one of these sets of bars, there's a description of the specific skill or the specific competency. And I'm not going to go through each one of them in a lot of detail, but if you look at that list, what you'll notice is the top half, so everything from chemical terminology down to maybe planning and design of experiments or maybe interpretation of experimental data, those are quite chemistry specific skills. Those are things that you would expect a chemist to be able to do. Whereas if you look at the bottom half of that list, if you look at things like numeracy and computational skills, report writing, oral presentation, those are the types of things that you'd expect any graduate to be able to do, regardless of the subject they were working in. So you can almost split this up into subject-specific skills and transferable skills. So those things we expect anyone to be able to do, we call them transferable skills. And the subject-specific skills, if you look at the data, if you look at the, I never remember what we call these colors really, this kind of darker color here, it's kind of maroon, I think we call that. So that darker color shows how well developed those skills or competencies were at university level. And what you can see is you get very high development scores for all of the chemistry specific skills. So they're all coming in mostly at 80% or more. There's a few that are slightly below that, but most of them are 80% or below. This is what graduates were telling us. So they were saying that the degrees they studied did a very good job of training them in these chemistry skills. So that's reassuring in some ways, and you can take that as a good thing. However, if you look at the other bar, the lighter bar, the one that looks a bit more blue or mauve or whatever color that is, you can see those chemistry specific skills, those same people were not rating them as being very useful. So they were asked how useful they were in a professional context, how useful they were in their day-to-day job, and you can see the scores are much lower than they were for how well developed they were. So a few of them kind of creep up to about 70%. So these here, manipulative practical, safe handling of chemicals, but a lot of them 50% or less, like principle of thermodynamics, kinetics, inorganic compounds, for example. A lot of those graduates were not using those skills. That might be because they're not working in a chemistry job, for example. If you look at the transferable skills, the situation is kind of flipped. It's the other way around. This time, those experiences and those skills were, let's say, inconsistently developed during the degree. The score, the development rating is not as high. So that darker, that kind of maroon color, that maroon bar is typically not as high as it was for the chemistry skills. Few of them were quite well developed, like interpretation of experimental data. But some of them get quite low scores, like oral presentation skills, for example. That's only just over 60%. If you look how useful those graduates rated those skills, so you can see they're all rated very highly. In fact, some of them are 90% or high, including independent learning ability, time management, and problem-solving skills, all rated over 90%. But if you look how well developed those same skills, if you look at time management, for example, that's about 94, 95% in terms of how useful it is in a degree. How well developed in their degree was it? About 66, 67%. So there's a big gap there between those two scores. And what we wanted to do, what we set out to do, was to close that gap. We wanted to boost the development scores for these transferable skills. We wanted degrees to spend more time embedding training of these transferable skills in a chemical context. So this is a little bit of data about our students and their motivations for studying chemistry. And I like looking at this because this gives us a bit of background on the subject. And you can see subject enjoyment. Chemicals, students who apply to do chemistry in the UK tend to have much more subject enjoyment than the average university applicant. So that's really good. So it tends to be kind of 55% for chemistry, and it tends to be something like 38, 39% for students in all subject areas. So that's quite a good thing. It's what you would hope for, I suppose. Quite an interesting one is interest in the course. This is really low, actually. Interest in course content. For chemistry, it's about, I don't know, 15%. And for students in all subjects, it's about 19, just under 20%. And I sometimes make a little joke here. I sometimes say that we have students who really enjoy being bored because they've got a very high enjoyment score, but they don't find the course interesting. So I always, that always confuses me a little bit, how you can have that conflicting scoring there. But we generally have students who apply to do chemistry because they enjoy the subject. It's not because it's a gatekeeper degree to a particular profession. It's not because it's seen as a profession that leads to a highly profitable career or anything like that. It's because they enjoy the subject. And part of our mission as educators in the subject is to build on that subject enjoyment. It's to ensure that we develop that enjoyment over the course of their studies, and we make people enthusiastic about the subject and passionate about the subject. And I think that's something that we sometimes lose sight on, but it's something that's really important to me. Now, I did a little bit of research myself on this as well. So I reached out to our students a few years ago now, just back in 2019. And we basically set up a very simple questionnaire. And we asked our first year students to rate what they expected their chemistry degree course to include. And we asked them this right at the start of their program. And we asked them lots of things, you know, did they expect the course to include memorization of facts and information? Well, more than 4 out of 5 of them did. Application of understanding, well, they pretty much all expected that, which is good. I'm glad they did. 94% expected calculations to be in there, great. 88% applications of chemistry to real world problems. It's interesting that there's actually just over 1 in 10 of our respondents that didn't think that was going to happen, possibly a reflection of prior educational experience, the way they were taught at school, possibly. This is the one that really interests me, though, opportunities to be creative. So only 50% of our new first year students in that academic year thought that chemistry was going to give them the chance to be creative. And that worries me slightly because chemistry should be a deeply creative subject. As problem solvers, we constantly need to think of novel, unique solutions to problems. We need creative minds to be able to do that. We don't just need people who know the subject back to front. We don't need people who can recite the periodic table from the start to end. We need people who have got this intimate understanding of the subject and how it applies to specific problems. And we need them to be able to come up with creative solutions. So that, for me, suggested that there was some work to be done here in terms of supporting creativity in the subject and giving students the opportunity to, first of all, realize that creativity is an important part of the subject, but also to give them an opportunity to develop their own personal creativity. And this is where context and problem-based learning comes into it. So there you go. I've talked for over half an hour and we've finally got onto context and problem-based learning. There you go. So I'm going to call it Cpbl from now on because it's easier. And in the UK, we almost always refer to context and problem-based learning together. So we heard the definition earlier, and I'll talk a little bit more about definitions in a second. But we generally group C and PBL together as a collective term, Cpbl, and this is what the RSC uses. The RSC uses this data. And we've used this successfully to integrate workplace skills into the chemistry curriculum now for over 15 years. And we did this at the University of Leicester initially, and we shared the lessons that we learned, and this is now similar approaches have been used elsewhere across the sector in the UK. The problems that we used are co-authored by a combination of academics, students. Sometimes we bring in undergraduate students to help write these problems. Sometimes we use graduates to help us. So we use alumnists, bring them back and get them to help us create problems. And we also use experts from industry. And the reason we do this is that we want to make problems that are grounded in real world scenarios. So we want them to be authentic. And we want the assessments of these problems to be authentic. The only way we can really do that is to bring people who face this type of problem day to day onto the author team. So it means I can't do it by myself. I need to work with other people. I need to work with collaborators in order to be able to achieve this. So Cpbl gives us a framework around which we can give students the opportunity to practice communicating their understanding of science with each other and to larger audiences. We give students the opportunity to solve problems that are chemically relevant but framed in real world contexts and to be creative. We give them the opportunity to work with others and hopefully work with others from different backgrounds so they learn how to make the use of a diverse skill set within a group. We also give them some awareness of the business and industry context within which our subject operates. So we can do a lot within Cpbl. We can use it to achieve a lot of things. And I wanted to talk about why we chose context and problem-based learning, because it looks a bit like we just picked a pedagogy, said, that one looks good, we will go with that. There's actually a lot of research that went into this. There was a lot of consideration, a lot of thought went into which particular approach we should be using. And Cpbl was selected partly because it aligns very well with the research-focused philosophies that are adopted in a lot of UK chemistry schools. So a lot of universities in the UK adopt what we call research-focused teaching. And Cpbl gives us a very effective way of embedding research themes in the undergraduate curriculum. And if we look at this, this is Mick Healy's research teaching nexus, which is quite an influential piece of work from almost 20 years ago now, actually from 2005. And I think he was commissioned by the Higher Education Academy to do this work, but it's been published in various different forms. So this particular diagram that I've got here, this matrix that is on this slide, actually comes from a book chapter that he wrote for the Open University Press. And we can see different ways of embedding research into the curriculum. So you can see research tutored, where the curriculum gives students the opportunity to learn the kind of techniques that we use as researchers. So it might be focusing very much on how do you write a paper? How do you give an oral presentation at a conference? That might be research tutored. Research-led teaching is where the curriculum is structured around teaching subject content that is based on those research themes. So we might embed research themes in our lectures, for example, or we might design practicals based on our research themes. We have research-oriented teaching, where the curriculum emphasizes the processes we use in research. So this might be very much based on problem solving, for example. That's one of the key processes that we work on. But then we have research-based. And research-based is what we're most interested in, because it's what the direction of travel of our universities. It's the philosophy adopted by a lot of the UK universities. Research-based education requires students to be active participants in the same kind of scenarios that researchers find themselves in. And that is most effectively achieved by using inquiry-based approaches like Cpbl. So this is a very student-focused approach. This is one where students have a lot of ownership over the learning experience. And it's an approach where there is a large degree of emphasis on research processes and problems. So Cpbl was a really good match for what we were trying to achieve in terms of revising the curriculum, what we were trying to achieve in terms of reducing the size of the skills gap, and also what we were trying to achieve in terms of delivering a research-based curriculum. There were also some successful examples of Cpbl in chemistry that already existed. So some actually existed in the UK. Very isolated examples. So Hull had done a little bit of work on this. Tina Overton led that. And Plymouth had done some work on it, led by Simon Belt. But it was relatively uncommon in the UK at the time, 20 years ago. There was a bit more work in the US, and there was actually some published Cpbl resources available from the US, but they weren't very widely used in the UK. The other advantage that we had at Leicester was that we actually had a degree that was taught entirely by Cpbl. So we had an integrated or an interdisciplinary science degree, which mixed chemistry, physics, biology, geology, astronomy, all into one degree program. It was totally separate to chemistry. It wasn't taught by us. It was taught in a different department by a different group of people. There was some overlap. It's a little bit complicated. I actually did teach on both degree programs, but I was working separately for both of them. And that degree was taught entirely by context and problem-based learning. So there were a few years of experience of doing it at Leicester in a different degree program. So we were actually able to learn from people who worked at our university. So that was a big advantage as well. That was another big factor in helping us to decide to use Cpbl. So Cpbl falls under this umbrella of inquiry-based learning. Problem-based learning itself, the pure form of problem-based learning, originated in the mid-20th century in medical teaching. I think McMaster University in Canada is largely attributed to be the origin, although I think there's a little bit of dispute. I think some other universities claim they started it. It has been subsequently adapted to work in a range of different subject areas. So it's often used extensively in STEM subjects, in science, technology, engineering, and math subjects. The PBL, problem-based learning, is very much student-centered, involves students working on solutions to open-ended problems. So these are problems that don't have fixed solutions. So this brings in creativity. This encourages creativity because there are a range of different ways of approaching these problems and there's no defined right answer. The problems are based on real-world scenarios, and I'll talk a little bit about where we get inspiration for those scenarios a bit later. The teaching staff who work with the students when students are doing PBL, we refer to them as facilitators. Facilitators are different to lecturers or tutors because they are, rather than leading the learning process. They are there to guide the learning process. So they're there to support the students, to facilitate the conversations, but they're not there to push the students in any particular direction towards a given solution. So the role of the academic is a lot more hands-off than it would be in many other teaching scenarios. And that's quite difficult for some educators. It's quite difficult for some academics who are very experienced in lecturing, for example. Sometimes they find it quite challenging to support a team doing PBL. PBL is entirely student-centered, so students define their goals, their targets, students do their research, they reflect on the success, they review their progress. So it is very much a classic example of active learning. Now, there are a number of different competences developed during the Cpbl process, and these were defined by Charles Engels, which you can find this in the there's a textbook called The Challenges of Problem-Based Learning, published by Bowden Folletti in the 1990s. And if you're interested in problem-based learning, I do highly recommend you have a look at this book. This is one of the ultimate source materials for a lot of the work that was done on Cpbl up until the end of the 20th century. And it's a personal I refer to very frequently. So students who engage in Cpbl activities, they adapt and participate in change. So they have to be comfortable dealing with very dynamic situations. The students have to become comfortable in making decisions in unfamiliar situations. They engage in critical reasoning and creativity. They work very closely as part of a team, so they collaborate with others. And they also have to be able to identify their own strengths and weaknesses and be able to think about, if I've got a particular weakness, what do I need to do about it to address that? What remediation do I need to take there? And I like to think of that as reflective practice, which is a term that's very frequently used in teaching practice, obviously, but it's not a term that you see very often in the undergraduate curriculum. It's not a term that you see very often in a chemistry subject-focused context. But I like to get our students thinking reflectively about their experiences, about the journey they are on in terms of their learning and their development. And I want them thinking about, how can I articulate my development, and how can I address my weaknesses? How can I address things that I'm maybe not so strong on? So going back to the start of the introduction of Cpbl at Leicester, our original aims were to encourage students to engage with the subject at a deeper level. So we're trying to get them to build on that subject enjoyment that they all told us that they had. We also wanted to embed chemistry research themes into the undergraduate program in a much more effective way than had been done previously. We wanted to give students the opportunity to apply the abstract chemical concepts that we're learning about in lectures to real-world scenarios. So we wanted to get them thinking about this thermodynamics that I've been learning in a set of lectures. I learned that, I might be learning the first law, the second law, I might be applying the Nernst equation in a lecture of chemistry, but they might think, okay, well, I've learned all these subjects. When would I ever use it? When would I ever need to use this? So we're giving them real context. So when talking about electrochemistry, we might be talking about battery technology. We might talk about new generations of rechargeable batteries and the chemistry that goes into them, for example. So it's exposing the students to these really interesting and important contexts and showing how they align to the subject material that the students are learning about in their core chemistry lectures. We're also working hard to embed the development of workplace skills in the curriculum in order to close that graduate skills gap that we talked about earlier. So we achieved this by working stage by stage, really. It was a very slow implementation, and that was very intentional. That was done by design. So we wanted to do it 1 year at a time, basically. We started with the first year of the degree program, and then in the second year, we started introducing Cpbl into year 2, and then the following year we did it in year 3. And there were a number of different reasons for that. One of which was it was a huge project. It was a huge undertaking. And it was only really manageable if we did it 1 year at a time. If we tried to transform the entire degree program at once, it would have been too large a task for us. The other reason we wanted to do it is because we wanted our students to be used to Cpbl from day one of their degree. And we thought it was unfair to introduce it in year 2 to a cohort of students who didn't have it in year 1. So we wanted to make sure that every one of our students had gone through our Cpbl induction in year 1 before they did the harder Cpbl problems in years 2 and 3. So that was really important to us. That was really vital to us. And that's why we started by just doing year 1 and following that cohort through their studies. We use a group size of 5 to 6. We used a combination of some existing material, which we borrowed from our interdisciplinary science degree, and we complemented that with some custom designed material, some new Cpbl activities. And the first time we did it, we ran it for 10 weeks at the start of the degree. And the problems focused on core topics in physical and inorganic chemistry. And we published our findings on this in 2010. And it was the 2010 paper covered a 3-year period, I think, entirely based on the first year implementation. So what happened in year 1 of the program. And I will be brutally honest with you now. I'll tell you the truth about our first implementation of PBL at Leicester. It didn't work very well. The students didn't like it. They really didn't like the Cpbl activities that we gave them to work on in first year. And on reflection, I know exactly why that is now, but at the time I couldn't really work it out. So what we did, we borrowed the Cpbl problem from our interdisciplinary science degree. And the context of the problem was that students were working as consultants to a Hollywood movie studio. And this movie studio were making a sci-fi movie about a group of scientists who were shrunk down in a capsule and went into a human body, and they had to describe all the structures they would encounter. So they had to describe some biological structures, some chemical structures. And this was something that it existed. It had been used in an interdisciplinary science degree. And we thought, well, it worked there. Why don't we borrow that? Our students hated it. They really didn't like it. They thought that the scenario was trivial. They actually, some of them in the feedback told us the scenario was insulting to them. And I think the key thing that we lost sight of as educators when we designed this is this 4th bullet point. The words in red at the end of that 4th bullet point, real world scenarios. Most chemistry students do not think they are realistically going to graduate from their degree and work as consultants to a Hollywood movie studio. And I can agree with that. I think that's a pretty unlikely graduate outcome for most of our students. So it's not realistic to them because they can't visualize themselves in that role. So when we design real world scenarios, we had to think very carefully about things that students can see themselves making a meaningful contribution to. And we learned that lesson very early on. And this is when we started using industrial co-authors on our PBL problems. This is when we started bringing people in from industry to help us create authentic Cpbl problems. So we developed a strategy for solving PBL problems, or context and problem-based learning problems. It's based on 3 general aspects: planning, research, and development reflection. It starts with the construction of a problem plan. I'll show you how we do this in a second. You can see it says an SET sheet in there. The SET sheet is a scaffold that we created to help students articulate their thoughts during the group discussion, create a record of the major decisions and actions that they had come up with. It is basically our adaptation of the Maastricht 7-step strategy. So if you've ever looked into PBL, you might know that the Maastricht 7-step strategy is a problem-solving strategy that was developed a few decades ago, very widely used. There are a number of adaptations to it, and the SET approach is our adaptation to it. I'll show you how it works in a second. So the planning phase is built around a lot of discussion and planning. The research phase is worked on addressing challenges and issues that have arisen from those discussions. And the development and reflection requires the students to get back together in teams, discuss the progress that they've made, think about what the things that they've already addressed, the challenges that they've solved, the parts of the problem they've solved, but also to think about what remains to be done, what hasn't worked, and how do they change their approach. This is what makes it very dynamic. So on the right-hand side here, you can see this is shown as a cycle. And in this cycle, you can kind of start at the top here with the problem plan. This is in a contact session. This is in a team meeting where students are discussing the problem and they are making some brief notes on this SET sheet about their approach to the problem. Part of those notes will include actions that will be assigned to the individual members of the team. So research tasks that the different team members will have to have. While they're doing this, they will get some feedback from the facilitator. They then go away and they research this, and they might research it individually. They might break themselves up into smaller sub-teams to do the research. They can then get back together, and they can get back together remotely, or they can wait until their next contact session. And when they get back together, they think about, well, how do we fit these different parts of research together to help develop a solution? And then we think about what kind of progress have we made and what remains to be done. And typically, we would expect students to have to go around this cycle several times before they come up with a suitable solution to the Cpbl problem. So they'd have to go around that a number of different times. And I think, just go back to that for a second, because maybe I won't, maybe it's not going to let me. Oh yeah, there you go. So yeah, if you want to see, if you want to download the kind of rationale, get more detail on this, I published a paper on this in the Student Engagement in Higher Education journal back in 2016, where I talked about how we assess Cpbl activities and how we support student learning. So I talked about the SET approach, and the SET sheet is actually just an A4 piece of paper divided into 3, and you can see how it's divided on the right-hand side of the screen there. The S section at the top is where we get students to write an agreed group summary of the problem that they are working on. So we get them to decide as a group, identify the nature of the problem, just maybe in 2 lines of text. We get them to write it up at the top there. The E section is where we get them to audit what they already know about the problem list. So those are the attributes and skills or areas of understanding they already have that will be useful for solving the problem. And the T section, those are the things to do. That's the action list, basically. Those are the things they need to go away and research, or the things they need to go away and do. And when they write their bullet points in the T list, we get them to put initials next to them so we know who the owners of those actions are. So if I was the owner of the action, they might put brackets DPW next to my initials. And for subsequent meetings, we require them to bring this piece of paper with them. Now, we started doing this in 2007. It was just a piece of paper back then. We now get students to do a digital version of this. We now get them to do an electronic version of this. We encourage them to use Microsoft Word online to do that. However, some of them choose to do it in Google Docs, which is also fine. It's absolutely fine. I'm perfectly comfortable allowing students to choose whichever software platform they want, as long as they share the document with everyone who needs access to it. Okay, so I've spent quite a lot of time there spent almost an hour there talking about the background, talking about what we did, why we did it, and a little bit about the ways that we did it. What I haven't talked about so far is any of the problems, any of the Cpbl activities. So I thought I'd break this into a separate section, and we'd have a look at some examples of Cpbl problems I've developed at the University of Leicester, and talk a little bit about some of the research that I've done on their effectiveness as well. So the first thing I wanted to think about before looking at some specific examples was what goes into planning a new Cpbl problem? What goes into that design process? I think one of the key things to decide is the focus of the problem. So who is the audience? Who are the students that you're going to be working with? What level are they at? So what experience do they have? What understanding of the subject do they have? What skills do they have? And that helps you define the level of difficulty and the way you integrate different subject areas into the problem. It's obviously really important to define the intended learning outcomes and to ensure the activity and its assessment aligns with it, that we've got that constructive alignment that we'd expect in any example of education experience. We need to develop a suitable scenario. I'll talk about some of the fun ways that we can do that in a little while. And we also need to think about how we're going to assess it. And I think it's really important that we plan authentic assessments so that we are able to give students the opportunity to buy into the scenario and learn and apply skills in the ways that professionals would in the subject. So if I'm getting them to do an oral presentation, I'm always giving them a specific context and a specific format for how they do that. So Cpbl problems typically start with what we call a trigger, and the trigger is something that captures the attention of the participant. So it could be a statement, it could be a little bit of text, but it could be a picture or a video or a little bit of audio. And it's important that when we do this, when we set this up, we set it up in a way that it requires the entire group to engage with it. What we don't want to create a problem that one person will say, oh, I know lots about this, so I'm going to be able to solve this by myself. We need to create problems that include enough complexity and diversity in topic area that they need to be dealt with as an entire group rather than by just a small number of individuals. Now, there's a few good ways of creating Cpbl problems. You can take an existing activity that you do with your students and you can adapt it to the Cpbl format. That's one way of doing it. So nothing wrong with doing that whatsoever. Most of the time, I create new Cpbl activities from scratch. I start from a clean slate, essentially. And my inspiration when I create a new Cpbl problem will be something in the news normally. So an area of scientific interest in the news. So to give you some examples, I created a Cpbl activity about 5 years ago called Chemistry and Food Analysis, which was inspired by some news here in the UK at the time that supermarkets and shops were selling food products that were contaminated with unexpected meat sources. So some supermarkets were selling products that were badged as beef, for example. It might have been selling ready meals like lasagnas and mince-based products that were supposed to be based on beef, but they actually contained trace amounts of other meat sources, including horse, which horse is not eaten at all in the UK. It's taboo in the UK. So this was quite a scandal at the time that this had happened, that some companies would be were contaminating their products with these with these other meat sources. And there was a lot of attention put on to how do we actually characterize the different sources of these meat? How do we determine what animal the meat has come from? And that brought up a lot of chemistry, a lot of analytical chemistry, and a lot of biochemistry. So we designed a Cpbl activity based around that context, which the students found really interesting. I've had a Cpbl problem that I co-authored about 10 years ago now, called The Chemistry of Energy, that I still use. And this is about the development of sustainable energy strategies for small nations. And it is based on different forms of renewable power sources. And for each of those, we look at the chemistry. We look very deeply at the chemistry involved. So for wind turbines, for example, we think very carefully about the materials used to create the magnetic components. So we think about the neodymium. Where does the neodymium come from? How do we extract it? How messy is that process? What are the side products? So there's a lot of chemistry that goes into all of these different sustainable energy technologies, even though some of them are not necessarily obvious. So we encourage students to investigate that. And we'll talk about what they do with that later in a few slides' time. The other thing you can do is to actually borrow a Cpbl problem that someone else has designed. So there are lots of freely available Cpbl problems that have been published on the internet, and lots of those can just be downloaded and repurposed. So a lot of them have open access licenses. So the first specific example that I'll talk about is our induction activity. So this is the PBL problem we give students. This is the Cpbl activity that we give students to get them used to the Cpbl format. And it is a half semester long induction activity where students design, develop and evaluate a learning resource for our first year general chemistry module. I have to apologize, we do have a module called general chemistry, but it is not a US general chemistry module. It's more complex than that. It includes quantum chemistry and more complex topics. It's just unfortunate it has the same name. So we get students to design learning resources for use with other students on the course. And the process involves the planning, design, development and piloting of that resource. They have to do essentially a mini educational project. They have to build a prototype version of it. They have to test it out on a group of volunteers. And they have to design a suitable evaluation for it. This gets them thinking about not just creativity and how to present the subject, but gets them thinking about experimental design, gets them thinking about data collection and data analysis, which is equally important in analytical chemistry as it is in pedagogy. So the target audience for this is the 20-minute bus commute. You can see the wonderful bus, the horrible green bus down the bottom there. That's the University of Leicester's shuttle bus between the city centre, the campus and the halls of residence. It's actually two buses stuck together. It's got a little bridge between them to hold it together. And what we wanted was for students to design learning resources that other students could use when they were on that bus, basically. So it had to be portable, had to be something that could be done in about 20 minutes, which is how long the journey takes. And we framed this as a kind of Dragon's Den style activity. So based on the UK TV show Dragon's Den, I forget what it's called in America. They have another name for it in America. It's the show that Donald Trump used to present in America before he went off to do other things. And the idea is they develop this as a kind of business idea, a business pitch, and they present it to their peers. So at the end of this activity, at the end of this short activity, we evaluated it and we looked at the impact it was having on students. So this is a Likert scale evaluation that is done at the end of the activity. This is about 2 cohorts worth of data, so 168 participants. This would have been the classes of 2016 and 2017, I think. So quite broad agreement that it helps them develop a project plan, discuss science with their peers, reinforces their existing knowledge of the subject and meet new friends. So that's all great. What it doesn't necessarily do is help them to discuss science with their facilitator. So it doesn't necessarily break down that barrier between the student and the educator in terms of communication. So they might still have uncertainties. There might still be things that they don't quite understand or things that they want clarification of, that they still feel too intimidated to ask their facilitator for help with. So great diversity in terms of the resources that were developed. So there were 18 different teams, about 6 people in each team. And the types of resources, really great distribution. So we had some that were text-based, about half of them were text-based, but we had podcasts, we had interactive web activities, we had videos, and the topics they chose spanned the entire scope of the subject. So we had basically everything that was being taught at the time was covered. We had simple inorganic chemistry like structure and bonding. We had organic nomenclature and definitions and mechanisms, periodic trends from inorganic chemistry. Some students chose to do laboratory techniques, which they were studying at the time. So it really gave them a good opportunity to think about their learning and to present it in a way that would be suitable for an audience of peers. So some really nice quotes in terms of what the key things the students felt they were getting out of this. It helped them learn how to work as a team, develop their communication skills, and it also helped them to solve a problem that related directly to their own interests. Because the audience was peers, they identified with that audience clearly, therefore it helped them buy into the problem scenario. So this is a very gentle introduction to the Cpbl activity. Now, this is a more complex Cpbl activity. This is the chemistry of energy that I mentioned about 5 minutes ago. And when they're working on the chemistry of energy, students are advising the government of a small nation. So they're acting as scientific advisors to national government, which students do buy into that scenario. So students do engage with that scenario. And the students are presented with 5 different alternative solutions to this nation's sustainable energy difficulties. So they could invest in more nuclear power, for example. That's one of the solutions. They could invest significantly in solar farms, so photovoltaic cells. They could invest in wind farms or power from biomass, or they could invest in the clean fossil fuel technology, which is slightly questionable, but they could invest in carbon capture technology and keep burning the remaining fossil fuels that that nation has access to. So they have to critically evaluate these different funding proposals that the government has received. They have to help the government come to a reasoned decision. Once they've done that, they are assessed in 2 different ways. One is a public-facing press conference. So they do a presentation, but it is done in the style of a press conference. So that rather than standing up with a PowerPoint and talking for 20 minutes, they have to talk for 15 minutes to an audience of members of the press. And they're largely facing questions that whole time. So the presentation style is very different to what they might be used to from earlier years. The other part of the assessment is to write a short review article, which would be suitable for publication in an MRSC journal. So that's a totally different audience type and a totally different style of communication again, because for that one, they're writing to an audience of scientific researchers, and they're writing it in the style expected of a peer-reviewed journal article. So it has to be a very balanced review of the technologies. Chemistry of food security, like I told you earlier, this is a really interesting Cpbl activity based on food fraud, based on contaminated meat products, and how we establish and verify the source of origin of the meat products that are on sale in shops and supermarkets in the UK. We actually expanded this problem. So we started using the challenges of identifying contaminated meat products. We actually expanded it out. We talked about drinks and other food products that have been contaminated. And the role of the students is to work as members of a food analysis lab and to design experiments, design and conduct suitable experiments for analyzing this. So there's a lot of experimental design that goes into this, but also the reporting back at the end has to be done in a way that is suitable for various different audiences. So they have to report back to the general public, but they also have to report back to the companies that are producing these meat products. So they have to think about the legislature, they have to think about the legal aspects of that as well. So it brings in different disciplines that interface with our subject. I'm just going to jump past that to the assessment. And for the assessment, what I try to do is get a very diverse set of assessments for each of the activities that I develop. So for the chemistry of energy, we get students to write a press release, we get students to do a press conference, and we get them to write a research paper. The press release and the press conference are very much focused on an audience of journalists or even the general public. The research paper is focused on an audience of scientific experts. So we get the students to think about the problem in 2 very different ways and to articulate their understanding of the problem to 2 totally different types of audience, which have very different requirements. For chemistry and food security, students write a series of formal reports, which might be for the laboratory that they're working for, or they might be for the government, or it might be for the companies producing the meat products. They also have to create experimental plans. They have to build a training website for other employees at the analytical laboratory that is used in the context, and they have to create a business pitch for the new exploitation of a new research theme in food analysis. Okay, so I am looking at time, and what I want to do, I want to leave a little bit of time for some questions and comments and what have you. So I'm going to make this the last section. I did actually have another section after this. What I will do, I'll add that onto one of my other presentations that I do, and that way I can wrap this up probably in the next 10-15 minutes, and we can have some time for questions, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, perhaps can you make it in 10 minutes?
10 minutes, yeah. Can you, when I come to about 9, just give me a little warning and I'll wrap it up. I can always wrap, wherever I am, I can wrap it up. You know, I'm an expert at that, you know.
Okay.
So I just wanted to end by talking a little bit about the impact that this has had on our students, on the students who've been participating in this. These are all student quotes, and these are lovely, lovely examples of feedback that we've had from students over the years about some of the unique benefits, the unique advantages they feel they've had in their learning from engaging with PBL. So actually working with other students has given them the opportunity to see how other people work, how other people understand the subject, and it's given them an opportunity to kind of benchmark their own understanding and also learn from their peers. Time management is definitely something that comes up a lot. So setting deadlines, sticking to those deadlines, working on complex problems with limited guidance, the similarity to real life problems at this. I'm really pleased with that because that's something that's very difficult to get right. And we did, you know, we made some mistakes initially, but we did eventually get that right. And giving students the opportunity to apply their skills in a way that they don't get to use them in other types of learning experience. So these are all things that I think are really, really important about the CPBL experiences that we give our students. Now, in terms of supporting the students in the CPBL sessions, getting the facilitation right is really important. So we use trained facilitators. So we have to get facilitators used to the CPBL methodology. We have to give them examples of problems that they might encounter. We set up a community of practice so they can share challenges and difficulties that they've faced and collectively come up with solutions. But it's important that we do train our facilitators. And largely, it's a case of training them not to be too directing. We need to get a good student facilitator ratio, so we need to make sure that each facilitator isn't working with too many students. So typically we work with two groups of students if possible. That's about 12 students, but if absolutely necessary, we might go up to 3 groups per staff member. The group allocation is something that is quite important as well. So thinking carefully about ensuring that no one feels isolated in a group and everybody has the opportunity to feel part of that group. That there's an element of that goes into the kind of engineering and the creation of the group in the first place. And the group composition, making sure we got a good balance of backgrounds and talents so that they complement each other essentially, so that those students can kind of play off each other's skills and experiences. The assessment has to be authentic, and that kind of comes back to that lesson that we learned very, very early on. The student roles in the problem scenarios have to be realistic. Students have to be able to visualize themselves doing that kind of thing in a professional context. Think carefully about the skills that you want to assess, because CPBL gives you a range opportunity to embed a wide range of different skills and experiences. So focus on the ones that you want to achieve in that particular problem. Don't try and do everything all in one problem. Converting a group mark into an individual mark, that's a bit of a challenge. So think about whether you need to do peer review or peer assessment or some other form of way of converting that mark from a group mark to an individual mark. I'll skip that. Let's go to this. This is the one I like. This is the kind of take home. If ever I get asked by anybody influential, why should we do CPBL? Why should we integrate this? Because it's a big investment. It's a lot of time, a lot of effort. I show them this data. This is our UK government compiled employability statistics for the University of Leicester's chemistry degree. And what you're looking at there is the percentage of graduates who go into full-time employment. And you can see the figures slightly improve over that 5-year period of time. So we kind of go up from, we're in high 80s in 2012-13 and 2013-14, and we're up to the high 90s by 2016-17. So we see this very gradual but steady improvement in those employability scores. Now, this chart shows what the UK government refers to as highly skilled employment. This is employment that requires someone to have a degree in, or it also includes PhDs and teacher training programs. So it's something that requires you to have a first degree before you can do this. This shows a more a stronger increase over that 5-year period, a more marked increase. This 5-year period tracks when the first graduating cohort who had done the Cpbl activities were filtering through our process. So as we increase the scope of Cpbl activities in the degree program, we got improved graduate employability from our students. And this is something that I've shown to pro-vice chancellors and something that I've shown to deans of education and people in very influential positions. It's a very powerful bit of data. This is actually the data for the Leicester chemistry students in the time frame that we introduced Cpbl. So it's very, very, very powerful. Like I said, I was going to talk about what happened during the pandemic. I will save that up. I'll talk about that on another occasion, because that's probably about another 15, 20 minutes, which we don't have. So I will wrap up for today's session on that slide. And once again, I'll thank you for coming along and for your attention today. And I'll just open it up to any questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dylan. It's such an comprehensive talks from the beginning, why University of Leicester especially using trying to adopt the new approach to the curriculum. So I think as I said in the chat, if you have a question or some question, you may raise your hand, or you can type it on the chat box and I will read it for you. And you may use Bahasa Indonesia and I will translate it. Okay, while we're waiting for the question, I think
I think we've got a hand up already.
Yeah, I think it's you know, it's really complete. Yeah, you talk about why the background. I will use bahasa if you don't mind. So jadi pada pembicaraan presentasi yang disampaikan oleh Dylan tadi sudah lengkap sekali ya bahasanya, mulai dari kenapa awalnya kenapa tertarik pada Cpbl, tapi sebenarnya kalau di Leicester digunakannya dua-duanya guys, Cpbl bukan Cbl atau PBL sendiri, tidak, tetapi di Leicester digunakan dua-duanya. Jadi disebutnya Cpbl, Context and Problem Based Learning gitu. Nah, jadi dari tadi sudah dijelaskan dari awal sampai akhir bahwa bagaimana University of Leicester dalam hal ini Dylan dan grup riset grupnya memilih pendekatan Cpbl ini. Jadi ada beberapa alasan tadi yang sudah disebutkan bahwa memang ternyata awalnya ada masalah dengan gap ya. Jadi skill gapnya masih banyak, yang beberapa yang masih belum sesuai gitu. Graduate-nya, lulusannya belum mencapai skill yang harus dibutuhkan oleh stakeholder gitu ya. Nah, oleh karena itu, karena ada gap tadi, makanya dilakukan, oh ini harus reform gitu ya, harus reform terutama untuk kurikulumnya. Makanya dimulailah project ini jadi sudah dari tahun 2000, kalau kita lihat tadi ya, tapi sebenarnya Dylan sudah melakukannya mulai dari tahun 2008, 2009, presentasinya jadi sudah cukup lama, hampir dan presentasi publikasi sudah mulai dari tahun 2010. Nah, tadi juga sudah dijelaskan bahwa pada awalnya ini struggling gitu ya. Jadi semua siswa kayaknya menolak gitu, ini kayaknya susah mau diterapkan gitu. Memang pada awalnya agak problem based learning atau CBL ini memang tidak semudah itu langsung bisa diterapkan gitu. Nah, makanya kalau kita lihat perjalanannya tadi agak panjang. Jadi pada saat diterapkan banyak yang menolak ya, terutama dari siswa, dari angket yang diberikan tadi sudah dijelaskan. Kemudian baru sedikit demi sedikit mereka merubah pendekatannya ya, baru kemudian banyak ya sudah mulai lebih smooth gitu ya. Nah, tadi juga sudah dikembangkan bagaimana mencari permasalahan. Nah, jadi permasalahan yang terjadi ini memang otentik ya, terutama alasannya kriteria utamanya. Jadi memang terjadi gitu. Nah, memang di Leicester sendiri memang kurikulumnya memang sudah berdasarkan konteks and problem based learning gitu ya. Nah, saya rasa itu yang bisa disampaikan. Tadi juga sudah disampaikan beberapa keberhasilan, jadi mulai di atas 5 tahun sudah mulai kelihatan hasilnya ya, dari awal diterapkan bahwa CBL ini mampu meningkatkan skill dari mahasiswa atau lulusannya gitu. Nah, itu yang bisa saya sampaikan untuk secara keseluruhan. Mungkin tadi kalau Dylan bicaranya lama sekali ya, tapi saya ringkas saja. Nah, mungkin ada pertanyaan, silahkan. Oke, ada Diva Andika, raise hand. Oke, silahkan.
Okay, can you hear my voice?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I can hear your
Yeah,
voice.
we can hear you.
David, you say that when we make a problem-based learning or PBL, we need to make a problem that will not be able to solve by one student, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So,
but when we make that kind of problem in problem-based learning, students sometimes will think that the problem that they get is too difficult to solve.
Yeah.
And so in the end, they don't have any progress on the problem. So how can we encourage them to solve the problem they got?
Fantastic question. Really, really good question. And I think that that initial reaction that students have to the problem being too complex or too challenging is something that I think almost everyone who's ever used Cpbl has encountered that. I think one of the things that we have to familiarize students with is the fact that they will encounter unfamiliar situations throughout their career. So as professional chemists, as teachers, or as academics, or whatever it is they choose to do after they finish their degree, they will be working in a scenario where they are graduate professionals, so they have a degree, and they will be expected to solve complex problems. And the types of problems that we deal with in our everyday lives, the types of problems we encounter in our work, they do tend to be very difficult to solve, and they don't have a very obvious solution. They don't have a natural solution. And one of the great strengths of the Cpbl approach is the ability it has to transform students' perception of what a problem is. So at school level in the UK, when a student sees a problem, they will see a kind of end of chapter question. They will see a very fixed question. So they might have been studying a particular topic. They might have been studying a topic, bonding or structure, for example, and they might be asked to describe the bonding in a particular compound, for example. And that's a very closed topic based very, very explicitly on the learning the student will have had in the lesson. And those are the types of problems that our students are used to dealing with. Whenever they think what a problem in chemistry is, they think of that when they arrive at university. We're using PBL to get them used to this complex, challenging nature of the problem that we are more used to encountering. However, the facilitator is there to give them some guidance. So the facilitator is there to ensure they don't feel overwhelmed. And I think it's quite a difficult job to facilitate a PBL group effectively, because you don't want to give them too much support. You need to avoid giving them too much support, but equally, you need to ensure that they don't find the problem impossible to complete. So it's a question of getting that amount of facilitator input just right, so that you're getting them productively discussing potential solutions to the problem, and also thinking about, we can't answer this question right away. Okay, so we've looked at the problem, we can't solve the problem immediately. How do we learn enough so that we're in a position to be able to solve the problem? What do we need to read? What do we need to do? What do we need to prepare before we're able to solve the problem? And that's all part of the process for us. But it's a great question, really good question.
Okay.
Thank you for the answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Diva, is that answer your question?
Yeah, that's
Okay, thank you. And there is one more question. It's from Vidya. She's a lecturer in another university. She wants to ask about, could you give her a tips or trick how to implement the PBL in her class, because the students has a low literacy, how to implement in that class. So,
Yep.
yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I think one of the great things about how we set a PBL problem up is the fact that there are lots of different ways of doing it. It doesn't require a lot of reading. So you don't really need students to read an extensive amount of material. Sometimes PBL problems are set up in a way where they do involve a lot of reading, but it doesn't have to be that way. So we could use video resources, we could use audio resources. I have even seen people act the PBL problem out. So I had a colleague at Leicester who used to do basically a little bit of a, it was like he was in a theatre almost when he was lecturing, when he was doing his PBL with his class. So he used to stand at the front, and he would be a teacher, basically. He was acting as a school teacher, and he would talk about the challenging situation he was in, and then he'd bring one of his colleagues in to discuss the scenario with him, and then they would talk about this problem that they had come up with and the fact that they couldn't solve it, and then it was essentially handed over to the class for them to solve the problem. So it can be framed in that kind of way as well. It can be framed in a very visual way, in a very either through video or through some kind of live acting in the session. It doesn't necessarily have to involve lots of written materials that the students have to work through.
Okay, thank you. Vidya, can you understand all of the answer? Can you follow it? So, jadi saya mau terjemahkan sedikit ya. Jadi memang nggak harus pakai sumber bacaan katanya ya. Jadi bisa pakai video atau yang lain, sarana yang lain yang bisa digunakan untuk menerapkan PBL ini. Jadi intinya walaupun literasinya rendah, kemampuan bacanya rendah, jadi PBL ini tetap bisa diterapkan gitu. Ya. Jadi itu jawabannya. Okay, is there any question? Is there any other question, please? Dylan, I want to ask you about how the pandemic, the impact of the pandemic with the curriculum, because it's hard, during the 2 years, for almost more than 2 years to implement the curriculum. Yeah.
It is, absolutely, yes. So we introduced something called VPBL during the pandemic, which is virtual PBL, and this is actually what my last section of the talk was going to be on, the last 15-20 minutes or so. I didn't really have time for. So what I did was to redesign the problems to have different timescales. So I extended the timescales essentially because the students were very busy looking after family members who were ill, or they were back home. They didn't necessarily have all the technology they would have had when they were on campus. We decided to give them more facilitated support. So we give them extra facilitation sessions, and we also give them more time to work on the problem. It was all done online. It was all done remotely. So we used Blackboard Collaborate Ultra to support the facilitation sessions. And we had to convert all of the assessments to be online suitable assessments as well. So our presentations, for example, they all had to happen remotely online. I can definitely go into more detail on that in one of the later talks, but we came up with a fairly successful way of dealing with that. And actually, the one thing I would say is, as a proof of concept, it does demonstrate that you can replicate the same type of learning experience remotely, which is really good, actually, because if you think about it, it creates a lot of new opportunities.
Yeah.
And it means potentially you could do collaborative activities between different universities, between different nations. You could get students working in teams that had some members in the UK, some members in Indonesia, some members in Australia, whatever. So there's really, really great, exciting opportunities there in terms of new ways of doing PBL that we could look into, I think.
Okay. Okay, thank you for the answer. There is someone who raised his hand, Mr. Judianto.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Erlina.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Dylan. Nice to meet you. I think based on your explanation, please correct me if it's not correct. So you implemented Cpbl in your general chemistry course, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think, is it 10 weeks or 10 meetings?
So it's spread over a 10-week period of time, and it would be a weekly PBL contact session. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it means that you create real world problems every meeting, right? So the students try to solve the problems for every meeting, or you give students opportunity to solve the problem probably for 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Yeah, so our problems tend to be quite big, and the amount of work that goes into them tends to be fairly involved. So what we do, we normally give the students between 4 and 6 weeks to solve a single PBL problem.
Okay, right.
So they tend to be quite long, most of them.
Okay, so it's not every week or every meeting to solve the problems, right?
No, so we actually started by doing that. When we first did it in 2007, we gave them a new problem every week. And what we found was the students couldn't actually keep up. They didn't have enough time to finish the previous one before they started the next one.
Yeah, right. So yeah, because now in Indonesia, we try to adopt problem-based learning for every level of students, since primary school to high schools. So I think teachers had to understand how to implement the problem-based learning. It's not, I think my perception, maybe you can correct me, it's not easy to implement problem-based learning, right? You have to set out, to prepare a good preparation, the real world problems. Not, can you explain, I think it's not only about present a problems or question, right? It's a real world problems. I think some students or some teachers have misconception about problem-based learnings. So it's not only presenting questions, something like general questions or tests, but real world problems. So it's like to train students skills such as collaboration, like communication, or solving the problems. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. What you've just described there is the distinction between a PBL activity and a standard group work activity. We're always working towards real world scenarios, and I think that brings in the complexity in the situation, actually. So when we think about a real world scenario, they are not easy to fix usually. They are multifaceted, complex problems that do require quite a lot of deep thought. And when we are working with those in our own professional context, we often have to go away and learn a new skill or learn something, do a bit of reading before we're in a position to solve them. And what we're trying to do here is give students that experience. So yeah, you're completely right in your distinction between a PBL activity and other types of group work.
Okay, and also at the end of the course, you give students real problems, like how to assess their performance, Or
Yes, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
It's not the what is that? The classical test, right? Is
No, that's right. Yeah, so the assessment is what we call authentic. So the assessment is based on the natural endpoint of the problem. So that might be a report, or it might be some kind of presentation, or it might be a product even in some cases.
Okay. So why did you add context problem listening? Or why don't you use a only problem-based learning?
That's more of a cultural thing in the UK, actually. So you may notice when I'm doing the talk, I often say PBL instead of Cpbl, which is an accident. I meant to say I tried to say Cpbl every time.
Okay.
But the reason is I see what I do as PBL. Culturally in the UK, PBL is always joined up with CBL. And it's something that the Royal Society of Chemistry has essentially driven as a kind of a term in the UK. So I'm so used to doing it now that I do try and always call it Cpbl. But yeah, what I see my own work, I see it as PBL, to be perfectly honest.
So that is the original like research or a novelty of your research, right? You add contextual.
Exactly. Yeah, there was a strong pedigree of context-based learning in the UK, and because they are so closely aligned that the RSC just decided to bracket them together, and they've stuck like that, unfortunately. So for the last 10, 15 years or so, yeah, it's become context and problem-based learning.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Dylan, for your explanation.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, because since PBL is the one of the CBL part, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, Dylan, there is one more question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, in the chat box, Unita, can you read it by yourself, because you already type it in English? Is there Unita? Because it's quite a long. Yeah, can you read it by yourself? The question.
Hello, hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Prof. Williams. Thank you for sharing the knowledge. I'm quite shy. I'm afraid that I can't tell. I can answer the question very well. So that's my question is, as you explained, students love the most part of chemistry is based on enjoyment of learning. I agree with the survey as a student, but right now I'm an employee. I want to establish my career path in such a holistic way. I don't really need the theory. I mean, that's important, but chemistry is a magic. Everything consists of atoms, so it's made from basic and oil, etc. In Indonesia, mahasiswa or undergraduate students got title as an agent of change. And then, what is it? Wait, can I scroll? Let me scroll this.
You can scroll it in the
Yes. Yes, in Indonesia, sir, mahasiswa or undergraduate students got title as agent of change. As an academic, especially, maybe you can tell me as an academic and also a little bit interest in activism, SJW, social justice warrior, maybe, especially when applying my knowledge into example, finding evidence in criminal cases. Sometimes it can't really work together with government policy. Maybe because of the complicated rules and also the corrupt attitude. I want to ask your opinion, sir. How important scientists and policymakers work together in order to get not only we what is it? Bu, kayak ini Bu, kayak misalnya kita tuh bukan hanya bicara tentang real world problems gitu, tapi kita tuh menyelesaikan masalahnya gitu sampai ke kebijakan-kebijakannya.
Okay.
Thank you.
The last part is I will translate it for you. So it's not only to solve the problem, but the real world problem, but it's all we need to solve the, policy problem related to the policy, how to, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think you get it.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
definitely. This is actually such an important point. And this also comes back to another big issue that we had in the UK, in that we don't have enough graduates of science subjects influencing policy. We don't have enough who go into that area. And if you look at the politicians in the UK, if you look at our science ministers, they very rarely have backgrounds in science. They normally get transferred from a different government department, and if you look at where their education is, it's normally in a humanities area. It's not normally a scientific area. One of the next things that I want to do is to give the students, the chemistry students at Birmingham, more opportunity to work in truly interdisciplinary groups, and to give them experience of working not just with scientific peers, but also with their peers in law, politics, get them thinking about those kinds of experiences, because ideally, I think all chemistry students should have the opportunity to do that. And all chemistry students should have some experience during their degree of working with people with those types of backgrounds to raise their awareness of how things work in practice in the real world. Ultimately, I completely agree that we need more collaboration between trained scientists, between trained STEM graduates and the policymakers. And we need them to be influencing the way those policies are made. And we do sometimes see, here in the UK, we have a lot of issues that sometimes things that really would benefit from scientific oversight, those decisions are not necessarily made by scientists. However, we saw the strength of scientists and politicians and policymakers working together during the COVID-19 pandemic, where the government co-opted a group of scientists in, and they brought some very, very esteemed scientists in to help define policy, and that helped the UK during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, that's not normally how things work. Under normal policy, those decisions don't tend to involve scientists as much as you would like them to. So ultimately, I think we need to have a much bigger role in terms of informing policy decisions at that type of level. Completely agree.
Okay, yeah. Unita, is that? Is that answer your question?
The pandemic solution is coming from the Europe, and Indonesia is implemented it. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Very nice to meet you.
The good news is the UK approved a new vaccine yesterday, which is, I think we're the first country in the world to approve a vaccine for the Omicron variant. So it is, that kind of thing does still happen in political decisions in the UK, but it's just limited to certain areas, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can be more agree to your opinion. It's really nice. I totally agree with that. So I think that's enough for the question. Is there any closing statement from you, or you want to say something before we close the session?
I'll keep it very brief. I really want to thank everyone for coming along again today. I'll say it in Welsh, just so I've said something in Welsh. So diolch yn fawr I pawb. So that's just thank you very much, everyone. I have obviously the session's been recorded, so please do, if you've got anything you want to check, please do watch it back. What you'll notice is at the bottom of the slides, I've annotated a lot of them with the relevant literature sources, so that, as we talked about at the start, there are quite a few papers that I've published on this in Journal of Chemical Education and SERP. So please do feel free to refer to those if you want a bit more background. But I've really enjoyed it, and I've really enjoyed the questions as well at the end. So thank you very much again, and yeah, it's a great honour to be able to talk to you today.
Yeah, thank you for agreeing to attend this event, Dylan. Thank you so much. So
no problem
for the participant, thank you for coming with us. So there will be two other sessions that will be on the 23rd of August and will be on the 13th of September, right? On the in the same time. So we will announce it later on. So still with Dylan, but we have a different theme. We have a different title. So the second talk will be about the gamification, and the third talk is about the virtual laboratory. Is yeah, if I'm not mistaken, yes. So it's really nice topic. So we wait. We're looking forward to see you in the future event. So thank you for the participants. Thank you for Dylan, who is the fantastic talks today, I think. Yeah, because since this is our first time to invite the foreign presenter, I think it's quite a success. Most of this, there are a lot of questions. I think, yeah, what you present is they can understand what you're talking about. So that's what I'm worried about. We are worried about the first time, but actually it's smooth. Yeah. Thank you. One more. Thank you, Dylan, and hope to see you again in the few weeks, in next week. Yeah, in next week and a few
next
weeks
week, next
later.
one.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for attending this for the participant, for the fantastic participant. I close this session. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. See you in the next week and with different title and few weeks later on. Thank you, Dylan.
Bye.
We can close it, right? So do we have to? Oh no. Okay, the MC is already. Yeah, just leave it to me. Okay, thank you. One more time. Okay. We will give you the certificate, Dylan, and we will contact you later on. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Bye.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Dylan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Dylan. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ma'am.
Ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
ma'am.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
ma'am.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Mr.
Bye.
Dylan.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, you're welcome. My pleasure. So
Thank you, ma'am.
you may leave if you want,
Thank
Dylan.
you, ma'am.
You have another activity.
Brilliant. Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
ma'am. Thank you, Mr.
Kita tutup ya.